The man from the state told him it was illegal about 4 minutes after he finished paying for it. Not unsafe, not unlicensed, not out of certification in some way that a fee and an afternoon would fix. Illegal in the plain sense that there was no lawful transaction anywhere in the state of Iowa that this machine was permitted to take part in, and no procedure existing under which it could ever be permitted again. He had paid $45. The lot was a cast-iron platform scale, and if you have never stood next to one of the big old ones, the number is going to sound like a misprint. It weighed 7 tons. 14,000 pounds of gray iron and steel and brass spread across a platform 10 feet by 14. Sitting on a cast frame with a system of levers underneath it that ran the whole length of the pit, and a pillar at one end 6 feet tall, carrying a polished brass beam with 3 sliding poises on it. It was built in 1911. It had weighed cattle, hogs, hay, coal, and for one 4-year stretch during a war it had weighed scrap iron. And it had done all of that on the same set of knife edges without being rebuilt once. It was, when he bought it, in perfect working order. That is the part people get stuck on, so it is worth being direct about it early. There was nothing wrong with this machine. It was not worn out. It was not broken. It had not fallen out of adjustment. 2 separate people checked it that autumn with certified test weights, and it read true across its whole range, which is a thing you cannot say about a great many scales that are in daily legal use right now. It was illegal anyway. And the reason it was illegal is a genuinely interesting piece of law that almost nobody outside the trade has ever heard of. And it is also, in the end, the reason a scrap yard in a neighboring county now pays this man $340 a year. But we are getting ahead of it. The sale was a farm dispersal about 9 miles outside Ottumwa on a wet Saturday in October. And the scale came up as lot 181, near the end of the day when maybe 40 people were still standing in the field. It came up as one lot, because you cannot really sell it any other way. The platform, the levers, the pillar, the beam, the poises, and the pit ironwork are a matched set. A scale is not a collection of parts. It is one instrument that happens to be spread out over 140 square feet, and if you separate the levers from the beam, you have not got 2 things worth half each. You have got scrap and a paperweight. The auctioneer opened it at $500 and got nothing at all. He came down to $200 and got nothing. He came down to $100 and asked, in the way auctioneers do when they are working a dead lot, whether anybody wanted a very large and very accurate way of finding out that they had wasted their money. That got the laugh, and the laugh is the part that matters, because the man who said the sentence that stuck said it into the middle of that laugh. He was a heavy man in a yellow work jacket standing near the front, and what he said was, "You bought a scale nobody is allowed to use." He said it a second later, after the hammer came down at $45. And he said it loud enough that the people at the back heard it, and somebody repeated it back down the line. Denby Pruitt, who was 57 years old and ran a one-man repair and fabrication yard south of town, did not answer him. He went and paid, and then he went and stood by the scale for about 20 minutes without doing anything, which several people noticed and nobody understood. He was not admiring it. He was working out how to move 14,000 pounds of cast iron 9 miles. That took him 11 weeks and cost $8,300, which is 184 times what he paid for the machine, and it is the reason nobody else bid. This is a permanent feature of the trade, and it is worth stating plainly, the price of a large old machine is almost never the price of a large old machine. It is the price of the rigging, the low loader, the crane time, the concrete, the pit, and the 4 months of your life. The $45 was a rounding error, and every single person in that field knew it, which is exactly why it went for $45. The move is worth 11 weeks of anybody's attention, so here is what 11 weeks buys. The first 3 of them went on the pit at the far end. A platform scale of this type does not stand on the floor. It sits down inside a masonry pit with a platform flush at ground level and the entire lever system underneath it in the void, which means that before anything could come out of the ground at Ottumwa, somebody had to go down into a hole that had been sealed since 1911 and find out what was in it. What was in it was water, about 14 inches of it, and below that a layer of silt that had come in through a cracked drain at some point in the 1960s, and under the silt, the levers. If you've made it this far into Denby Pruitt's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. They were fine. That is the detail everybody who works with this old iron will expect, and everybody else will not believe. Gray iron sitting in still water does not do what steel does. It skins over with a stable oxide and then largely stops. And the parts that mattered, the knife edges and the bearings they sit in, were hardened steel set into the castings and had been under oil that had turned to a kind of wax and protected them completely. He pumped the pit out over 2 days and spent a week photographing and measuring before he touched a bolt, which is the single most important thing he did in the entire project and the thing most people skip. A lever scale is not assembled from a drawing. It is fitted. Each pivot was set by a man in 1911 who adjusted it against the others until the whole system was in one plane, and the record of that work exists nowhere except in the machine itself. If you pull it apart without documenting where everything sat, you have not disassembled a scale, you have destroyed one and kept the pieces. He made 140 photographs and 11 pages of measurements. Then he took it apart. The heavy lifting was 2 days with a crane, and it was the least interesting part. The platform came out in sections. The main lever, which is a single casting about 9 feet long, came out on its own and weighed 1,100 pounds. The pillar went on the truck lying down, wrapped in blankets, because the beam mounting at the top of it is the one part of the whole machine that a careless bump will end. The brass beam traveled in the cab of his truck, on the passenger seat, with the poises off it, and wrapped separately. Then there was the new pit at his own yard, and this is where the $8,300 mostly went. You cannot set a scale on a slab. It needs a pit with drainage, and it needs the bearing points to sit on masonry that will not move seasonally, which in that part of Iowa means going below the frost line, and the frost line is 4 feet. He hired that out. It was the only part of the job he hired out, and it took 2 men 9 days and cost $5,100. And he has said since that watching somebody else pour concrete he could not afford was the worst week of the whole business. The rest of the money was the crane, the low loader, the rigging, the steel for a new drain, and about $400 of hardwood blocking that he cut himself. He was 2 months into it before he had a machine that could stand up, and he had not yet found out that it was illegal. That is a thing worth sitting with for a moment. Every hour of that 11 weeks was spent by a man who believed, entirely reasonably, that he was installing a working commercial scale, and who had no way of knowing otherwise, because the fact that would undo it was not a fact about the machine. There was nothing he could have inspected. It was a fact about a paragraph. He poured a new pit in December. He set the levers in January and spent 9 days getting them level. Because a lever scale is a mechanical calculator, and every one of its pivots has to sit in a plane within a few thousandths, or the whole thing lies to you in a way that looks like perfect confidence. It is worth understanding what those 9 days of leveling were actually for, because the mechanism is the whole reason this story has an ending. A platform scale has a problem to solve that is not obvious until you think about it. A steer can stand anywhere on a 10 by 14 foot platform. It can stand dead center, or it can stand in one corner with 3 feet off the ground, and the scale has to read the same weight either way. If it does not, then the number you get depends on where the animal happened to be standing, which is not a weight, it is an opinion. The way that gets solved has not changed since the 1830s, and it is one of the most elegant things in the whole history of ordinary machinery. Underneath the platform there are 4 bearing points, one near each corner, and each of those sits on the end of a lever. Those levers feed into other levers, and those into a main lever. And the whole system is proportioned so that whatever fraction of the load lands on any one corner is multiplied by exactly the amount needed to make the total come out the same. The geometry does the arithmetic. There is no adjustment, no compensation, and no clever part. It is 4 levers arranged so that the answer cannot depend on the question. The main lever then reduces the whole load by a large ratio, and on this machine the ratio was 600 to 1. 600 to 1 means a 2,000-pound steer arrives at the beam has 3 1/3 pounds, and that is why a man can weigh 7 tons by sliding a brass poise with one finger. Everything in that chain turns on the pivots, and the pivots are knife edges. A knife edge is a hardened steel wedge, ground to a line, resting in a hardened steel bearing, not a hole and a pin, a line sitting in a groove. The reason is friction. A pin in a hole has to rub to move, and rubbing means a load has to overcome something before the scale will respond, which means small differences vanish. A knife edge rocks. It has almost no friction at all because almost nothing is touching, and it will respond to a change far smaller than the eye can see anywhere else in the machine. It also means the whole instrument is savagely intolerant of being out of plane if those edges do not all sit in the same flat. The ratios stop being what the castings say they are, and the scale will be confidently, smoothly, and consistently wrong. Hence 9 days. He leveled it with a precision level and a straightage and a great deal of patience, working one pivot at a time and going back over the ones he had already done, because moving any of them moves the others slightly. And the process converges rather than finishes. On the 9th day it stopped changing, and this is the thing to hold on to, because it comes back at the end. Every one of those pivots is a mechanical relationship that you can see. A worn edge looks worn. A lever out of plane can be measured with a straightedge. There is no state this machine can enter in which it is wrong for a reason that is invisible. Nothing in it can drift quietly. There is nothing in it that drifts at all. In February he put certified weights on it, and it read true. And in March the state weights and measures inspector came out because Pruitt had done the correct thing and applied to have it sealed for commercial use. And the inspector looked at it for a long moment with an expression that the story does not fully record, and then explained the problem. Here is the problem. If a device is used to determine the quantity of something that money changes hands over, it is a commercial weighing device. And a commercial weighing device has to hold a certificate of conformance issued under the National Type Evaluation Program, not a calibration, not an inspection. A type approval issued to the design of the instrument after the manufacturer submits a sample of that design and it is put through an extended evaluation. The program was established in the 1980s. The scale was built in 1911 by a firm that went out of business in 1954. And there is no mechanism, none, under which a certificate can now be issued for a design whose manufacturer no longer exists and cannot submit anything. The device cannot be tested into compliance. It cannot be paid into compliance. There is no form. It is not that the scale failed. It is that the scale is not eligible to be considered. So, an instrument that had weighed honestly for 110 years and that read true against certified weights that February was permanently barred from weighing $1 worth of anything for anybody. Pruitt had $8,300 and 11 weeks in a machine that was. In the only sense that mattered to a business, inert, it could weigh. Nothing it weighed could be used. He did not do anything about it for 5 months. That gap is in the record because his own invoices show it, and when he was asked about it later, he was straightforward. He said he had no idea what to do, and that he had gone out to the shop a few times and put things on the platform and taken them off again, and that this had not helped. What broke it open was a phone call in August, and it did not come from a customer. It came from the same inspector. The inspector had a problem of his own. To check somebody else's scale, you need known mass. That is the whole method. You put a certified test weight on the device, and if the device says something other than what the weight is, the device is wrong. A county sealer carries a set of these weights, and for anything larger there are test carts. And for the really big platform and truck scales there are trailers loaded with certified blocks. The trouble is that test weights are physical objects that get carried around in trucks by people, and they wear, they corrode, they get chipped, they pick up dirt in the adjusting cavity, they get dropped. A 50-pound test weight does not stay 50 pounds forever, and the whole edifice rests on it being 50 pounds. So the standards have to be checked against higher standards, and those against higher ones again, all the way up to the national prototypes. And that chain is called traceability, and it is the entire basis of commercial weighing. The state metrology laboratory that recertified field standards for that region was running a 14-week backlog. 14 weeks is a long time to be without your standards if you are the person who checks everybody else's scales, and the inspector had been quietly looking for another option for most of a year. Now read the statute again. The certification requirement attaches to a device used in commerce. It does not attach to a standard used to test devices, because a standard is not selling anything to anybody. Standards are governed by a different section entirely, and what that section asks for is not type approval. It asks for accuracy and traceability and documented performance. The scale did not need to be eligible. It needed to be right and provable. And here is the thing about a mechanical beam scale that a load cell cannot do, and this is the actual reversal, so it is worth going slowly. An electronic scale can only ever be checked against something else. It has no opinion about itself. It produces a number. And the only way to know whether that number is true is to put a known mass on it. Which means your confidence in the scale is exactly your confidence in your test weight, and if your test weight has quietly lost a quarter ounce over 9 years, then everything you have certified with it is quietly wrong, and nothing anywhere will tell you so. A true balance can be checked against itself. Put the unknown on one side and bring it into balance. Then take it off and bring the same beam into balance again with a substitute load and compare. Reverse the poises, swap the positions. Do it again with the load in a different place on the platform. A beam scale with knife edges and lever arms will disagree with itself if anything in it is wrong. And the disagreement tells you where. Because there are only so many places a mechanical error can live, and each one produces its own signature. The machine reveals its own faults. That is not a nice way of describing it. It is literally what the method does. And it is why the old high-precision balances were built that way. And why the technique has a name in metrology going back to the 1800s. An electronic device fails silently. A beam fails visibly. So in September, Pruitt stopped trying to be a scale operator and became something else. And the something else did not exist as a job in that county before he invented it. He got the 1911 scale certified as a standard. That took 11 months, and it was not simple. And it involved a great deal of documentation and an eventual visit from 2 people from the state lab who spent a full day on it and left, by one account, in a slightly odd mood. The scale passed. It is on record as accurate to within a tolerance that the paperwork describes in terms nobody outside the trade would find interesting, and which is, in blunt terms, better than the field standards that were being used to check everybody else. And then the work started coming. Not weighing work, certification work, grain elevators, 2 scrap yards, a rendering plant, a truck stop with a pair of 80-foot platform scales that had never once been checked against anything but each other, a gravel operation, 4 livestock markets. Eventually, and this is the part that closes the circle, the county's own field standards, which now go to Pruitt's shop to be checked because the state lab is still backlogged and his turnaround is 3 days. He is not the inspector. He does not seal anything, and he does not enforce anything. That is a public office, and it stayed a public office. What he provides is the reference against which the inspector's own equipment is verified, which is a smaller sounding job and a more fundamental one. The numbers, because this channel always does the numbers. He charges by the device, and the rate depends on capacity. In the 4th year, the work brought in a little over $61,000 against a machine that cost $45 and $8,300 to install. And the only consumable in the entire operation is his own time and a set of covers he had made to keep dust off the beam. There is no maintenance schedule to speak of. There is nothing to calibrate, because it is the thing other objects are calibrated against. It has no firmware, no temperature compensation, no load cells to creep, and no manufacturer to go out of business, because that already happened in 1954 and it turned out not to matter. And then there is the twin. The scale that came out of the pit at Ottumwa had a sister, built the same year by the same firm that spent its working life about 70 miles east in a scrap yard. In 2016, that yard modernized, and the old scale was in the way of where the new weighbridge had to go, and so it was broken up and sold for what it weighed. 14,000 pounds of cast iron. At the price that week, a little under $700. That yard now sends its 2 truck scales and its floor scale to be certified against the surviving twin, and has done every year since 2021, and the annual bill runs $340. They will pass $2,100 of certification fees in about 6 years, which is 3 times what they got for cutting up the machine that would have done it for them for nothing. Nobody at that yard has ever mentioned this, and there is no reason to think anybody there has worked it out. The man in the yellow jacket was right, by the way. That is the thing to end on. He was not being stupid, and he was not wrong. Nobody was allowed to use that scale. Not Pruitt, not the elevator, not the livestock market, not the county. It was, on the day the hammer came down at $45, exactly as legally useless as he said it was. And it is still legally useless today, and it will never in its remaining life be permitted to weigh 1 animal or 1 load of grain for money. It was only ever going to be able to do one thing. Everybody in that field looked at a machine that could not be used for the job, and stopped there, because that is where looking normally stops. What none of them did was turn the sentence over and ask what a thing that cannot be used for the job might be uniquely good for instead. And the answer, which was sitting in the same statute that condemned it, is that a device barred from trade is the one device in the county with no commercial interest in the number it produces. It cannot sell you anything. That is not its handicap. That is its entire qualification. So the scale nobody was allowed to use is now the reason 4 counties can use theirs. And the paperwork that goes out of that shop every week says so at the bottom, in a line of small type that gives the reference standard, its capacity, and the year it was made. 1911.